Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's training session, and it is a council meeting, which I'll call to order at this point, even a little bit early, since we're all here and we have quorum. And I'm going to invite Councillor Forder to read our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe and Métis people and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend these waters.
And now I'll just invite you to join me in a moment of silent reflection on today's business. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest around the horseshoe? Seeing none, and I don't expect it will come up in this meeting anyway, are there any announcements before we move further? No, I'm on the wrong agenda. I beg your pardon. So this is an education session, and it's informal, and I just suggest to council that you don't have to address the chair in question period or anything like that. And I'll call on our fire chief to open the meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody coming together. We have two members from the Ontario Fire Marshal here that will be presenting the essentials of the municipal fire protection, Scott Haynes and John Doucette. John is actually our advisor for Meaford, so I call him pretty much once every month and a half to ask a question. He's very, very knowledgeable and has been very helpful for us. It'll be about 2.5 hours, I believe. I'll let them explain that in a little bit more detail. In regards to if there happens to be a fire alarm of some sort, we do have 2 exits, one in the back, one in the front, and we will meet over by where the sand is kept in the parking lot if anything happens. You want to go? I'll go. All right, here we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us here today. Really appreciate it. Just a couple of little extra house cleaning things before we get into this presentation. First of all, I would like if you could introduce yourselves so that I know who I'm speaking to. And then John and I will give a little introduction to ourselves. So whichever.
Let's start with Councillor Bartley.
Go alphabetically. Steve Bartley, councillor for the municipality of Meaford.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. I am, as advertised, Tony Bell.
Good afternoon. I am not Tony Bell. I am Brandon Forder. Thanks for being here.
Ross Kentner.
And you, Councillor Harley Greenfield.
Roger, for the councillor.
Perfect. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of a brief description of how things are going to go today. It's roughly about 2.5 to 3 hours. It's pretty high level information that we're giving. We're not giving specific details. We just don't have enough time in our presentation to do that. So we're keeping it very high level. It's an interactive session. So if you do have questions, please don't worry, just interrupt me, ask the question, and we'll go on from there. If I find that it's getting into an area where it's very, very detailed, or there's a lot of information that is needed, or there's information that John or myself wouldn't know, basically at that point, I would refer you to your fire chief to take that offline. But we'll keep it, pretty up high and everything else, okay? The great thing is, and we'll talk about this later on, is your fire chief has a lot of resources available to him, including our full office. So if you have a question that is too much for the chief and too much for John in this case, we will go throughout the organization to get answers for you guys. Let's see. So I would expect that cell phones have been silenced or on non-vibrate mode and all that. We'll just keep that as it is. Can I use this to advance slides? Let's see. Let's see if I could do it. There we go. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go back one here. So today we have some learning objectives. Okay. One of the biggest ones is go to understand legislative responsibilities and regulations that are affecting the municipality. So we're going to talk about who is responsible to do what. Basically what it comes down to in that point. We're going to review the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. This point forward, I'm going to refer to that as the FPPA. To say all those words in there, that gets my tongue a little twisted and I end up chewing things out. So if you hear me say FPPA, that's the Fire Prevention and Protection Act. Actually, I said it wrong, right? See, it's Fire Protection and Prevention Act. There you go. That's why I call it FPPA. During the session, if I do come out with acronyms, because we do in the OFM have a lot of acronyms, OFM, Office of the Fire Marshal, please, stop me and I'll explain to you, not an issue. We're also going to be reviewing a lot of concepts about fire protection services. Fire protection services we're going to be mentioning quite frequently during this presentation. We'll actually define it and we'll explain how we get to that point. Let's see, beautiful, I got to work. We have in the past had the Essential Seminar started off as a 2-day seminar. Then it went to a 1-day. With today's schedules, with COVID, with all these type of things, we've really modernized this session to be the 2.5 to 3 hours, but also being able to deliver it in many different ways. Okay, so today we're in session. It's good that way, but we also have online sessions, whether it be by Zoom, Adobe Connect, Teams. We have more of an in-person session where it's besides one municipality, it could be several municipalities. We do it morning, evening, weekends. We make sure that we accommodate to your schedules, okay? And that's why, it's easy for us to be here today. It's because this is what we want to do for you. Going forward, should you want to, say, retake a session, very easy, contact John and John will help you with an online session if that's what you wish, or if your neighbors are holding a session, or if your neighbors ask you about how the session go, at least you can let them know that the flexibility is there for them. Okay. So a little bit about the Office of the Fire Marshal. So the Office of the Fire Marshal is a branch of the Ministry of Solicitor General, amongst others, such as the OPP and Center of Forensic Sciences, Major Case Management, Community Safety, Correctional. So we're part of the group. And with that, we work with partners and other organizations to deliver fire safety. We share our expertise with lawmakers, with other organizations. And of course, we support municipalities and the fire departments. As I mentioned at the beginning, the FPPA is the responsibility of the Office of the Fire Marshal. And under the FPPA, there are a few regulations now. One of the most known is the fire code, but we also have the mandatory training, we have community risk assessments, mandatory assessments of complaint, those type of things. Those are regulations that are under that act. And we're going to go more into detail on who has to do what in these type of things. So far, there's no questions. That's a good thing. A little bit about our structure internally. Our administration and business services. So we provide corporate support for all the OFM divisions, as well as provide library resources for both fire and emergency management. We have a quality assurance risk management group who's there to ensure that reports, statistics, programs meet the best and the highest quality that we can achieve. And this is a fairly new group to our organization, and it's well received so far. We have fire investigation services. So when there's a fire that meets a certain threshold in your municipality and your fire chief has called the Emergency Operations Center in Toronto, a fire investigator may be sent to assist with the investigation. Okay. We're going to talk about some more details on that as we go along. We have a technical services group. These people are responsible for the fire code, writing of the fire code. They're responsible for evaluating and either accepting or not accepting a review for a fire safety inspection. They have engineering services that help with the fire investigations group as well. The Ontario Fire College, that unit is they maintain and deliver training, develop training. They're the people who are very busy right at this point with all this mandatory certification. They're actually an excellent resource for the chief if the chief is contacted. They're working really hard to get the information out there for everybody. We have public fire safety education. We're going to go a little bit more into detail pretty soon on that. But these people put the programs together that the fire departments could use. Programs you may see is smoke alarm program, carbon monoxide alarm program, 2 ways out. Those are those type of things. In the summer, barbecue safety. Can't wait for that, right? But field advisory services, that's the unit that both John and I are part of. We, amongst many things, we're going to go into detail on what we deliver, but we basically are the face of the OFM to you people. There's many other parts in there, but we'll see that in a second here. All right. Whoops, sensitive. So under field advisory services, we have 4 units in here. We have the South unit, the Northeast unit, Northwest, and the what we call the PDA, the Program Development and Analytics unit. These 4 units are under the control of the assistant fire marshal deputy. Okay. Acronyms, remember that? Assistant Deputy Fire Marshal. There we go. Sorry about that. In the South, that is us. We are the South unit. We're what, 10 advisors approximately, give or take. A couple of specialists, and that's taking care from Southern Ontario all the way out to the Eastern Ontario. The PDA group, or the Programs Development Analytics group, they basically created this program right here, this presentation. They do a lot of the program development. They do a lot of the analytics of fire statistics and so on and so forth, and then provide that to either the fire department, municipalities, or to the advisors as well. So at the beginning of this presentation, I said fire protection services. We're going to be talking about this quite frequently. The main reason is that the FPPA talks about fire protection services, and it defines it as well. So in the definition, it talks about fire suppression, fire prevention, and fire safety education. I believe it's the next slide that we're actually going to be talking about the 3 lines of defense. And that's what basically what that is right there. Okay. We talk about, as a definition, the mitigation and the prevention of risk created by presence of unsafe levels of carbon monoxide and associated safety education. That's our CO alarms. That needed to be added to the FPPA. The main reason was the FPPA was dealing with fire safety issues. Carbon monoxide is not a fire safety issue, but it's a life-threatening issue. So this part of the definitions was updated to allow us to write in a fire code the requirements of CO alarms. Also defined as fire protection services, rescue and emergency services. So the vehicle extrications, the hospital assists, if that's what you do, the medic assists, high angle rescue, trench rescue, water rescue. These are other fire protection services out there. Communication in respect to anything described through ANC. So communication involves quite a bit. If we look at that word, first thing we think of is the fire dispatch. Okay, but there's other communications in there in terms of the municipality communicating to its constituents what those services are. So municipality will define what the fire protection services are, it's up to the municipality also to let the people know what they are. And we'll go more into detail what that is about. Training of persons involved in providing anything described in A and D. So everybody needs to be trained to be able to do their job. That's just like any other profession, pretty much. If you have somebody in the roads department, they're trained to do their job, water department, et cetera, et cetera. So the fire service needs to be trained to do their job effectively and safely. And the delivery of any services described. We're going to be talking about delivery options a little bit later on, so that will be more explanatory later. But that is definitely part of the fire protection. So you have a need to protect your municipality. How are you going to deliver these services? So I spoiled the surprise before, and I talked about the three, or mentioned the 3 lines of defense. In the OFM, we always say the 3 lines of defense. And for us, what that means is public fire safety education, fire safety standards and enforcement, and emergency response. So I alluded a little bit to the public fire safety education when we have our smoke alarm programs, our means of escape, barbecue safety, those type of issues. The thing is that we don't want to really put, say, a blanket, anything goes into public education if you don't have that kind of risk. And we're going to talk about risk in the second part of our presentation. So our public fire safety education should be addressing the risks in our communities. Our fire safety standards and enforcement, that's our inspection programs. Okay, so there are certain occupancies that are requiring annual inspections. There are certain occupancies that require certain frequencies of fire alarm drills. So all these need to be done at the very minimum that what the fire code will detail. But there may be other risks in your municipality that could be mitigated or at least reduce the risk level by increasing your inspection program. Then the last line of defense, basically, if the education didn't work, the inspecting didn't work, and a fire happens, this is when the trucks go out. Okay, so we want to try to make sure that we do as much as we can on the first 2 lines to at the very least reduce the risk of fire, and if one should happen, have people get out in time to be safe. Okay, the last resort, we like those beautiful trucks, but we don't really like it when they have their lights on. That means there's an emergency, something wrong is going to happen there. We're okay on lines 1, 2, and 3 so far? Excellent. Whoops, I'm a little fast on the button here. So under the FPPA, groups of people or a person, their job roles are defined as to what their duties or their powers may be. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the role of the municipality. What the FPPA says the municipality shall do or should do. In the FPPA, we have section 2(1)A that basically, well, it says exactly this. Every municipality shall establish a program in the municipality which must include public education with respect to fire safety and certain components of fire prevention. If we go back to that slide right here, sorry, I've got the magic finger today. There we go. Their first 2 is exactly what they said in there. Public fire safety education and certain components of fire prevention. That's what that sentence says, or that section says right there. Okay. How and what is up to you guys. Okay, that's where the fire chief, along with council, decide through risks and everything else. Okay, here's our programs for the following year. This is our inspection schedule that we wish to propose to council for approval. And we go forward from that. Okay, so that's how we meet 2(1)A with the FPPA. I just want to make sure here, folks, that I'm not missing any information. Okay, so municipal requirements. This is the second part of the 2.1. The 2.1B it has that the municipality shall provide such other fire protection services as it determines may be necessary in accordance with its needs and circumstances. That is a really powerful sentence right there. I want you to remember its needs and circumstances, because we're going to really go into that a little bit more detail as this progresses. We talked what the fire protection services are or could be. There's an exhaustive list in the FPPA. We're also going to be talking about how we could deliver this. Okay, so it's not just that you have a delivery, a service that you need to deliver. How are you going to deliver that? How are you going to establish this fire department? And that's all going to come together and make 2.1A a complete sentence there. So one of the things that we wanted to look at is how do we discharge it? What do we do to discharge this responsibility? So again, under the FPPA, 2.2, it says, in discharging its responsibility under Section 1, a municipality shall appoint a community fire safety officer or a community fire safety team or establish a fire department. Okay, so the municipality has that choice, but how do we choose it, right? How do we determine that we need a fire department, or how do we determine that we're going to be okay with a fire safety officer or fire safety team? Well, there's a couple of quick ways we could evaluate it. So if you have a fire safety officer or a fire safety team, that person or those persons are the only people taking care of 2.1A and B. There's no fire chief, there's no firefighters, right? So can you think of a situation where a municipality may need to go to a fire safety team or a fire safety officer? Any thoughts in your mind on that? Don't be shy. This is your turn to shine. Show me your... Okay, we'll go further into that. But I'm going to go a little bit more towards internally. Okay. Any thoughts?
Partnership with a neighboring community, and that's the bar base. Partnership with our own fire department.
Okay, so maybe I wasn't explaining myself fully. Meaford has a certain population, has a certain downtown core, has the military base, possibly other things I'm not aware of. In your opinion, do you think you could have you need a fire department, or would a fire safety officer, which in this term we'll talk later would be the clerk, is that sufficient for Meaford? Probably not, right? So Meaford has basically, they have an urban center. Maybe not a large one like a downtown Toronto, but you have an urban center, you have the military base. What would be the population of Meaford? Okay, so there are actual municipalities in this province that have a population of 300, 400 people. Coburn Island, if I remember correctly, StatsCan said 0, but the one person lived there full time. Their population is summer tourists and people with cottages on the island. So there may be a low population. Maybe your building stock is just more rural, you know, and you do not have the building stock that is going to need a fire department. So a place like Harris, near Temiskaming Shores, you have Head Clara Maria, you have Carlo Mayo, Coburn Island, Archipelago. There's another one out there that I can't remember. Anyway, those are municipalities that do not have a fire department. So they're clerk or they have a fire safety team. Okay. In your situation, as we're going to see with risks, as well as some of these points, you need a fire department. And I don't know what your call volume is, but I'm pretty sure it's more than 2 or 3 per year. Just a little over, okay. Yeah. But here's an interesting little question for you. If you were in a smaller community and you were you had a fire safety team or a fire safety officer, thinking of those 3 lines of defense, you don't have number 3. So do you think you have to put a little extra work on 1 and 2 to make sure people know what's going on? Right? You want people to get early warning. You want people to know how to get out of their homes. Yes, sir.
Quick question, so point B, I'm just curious, is it
Yep.
sounds fire department, but it doesn't really break whether that becomes a volunteer or full time.
Correct.
So just curious what the distinction.
Fire
department, volunteer.
Okay, so a fire department is a fire department. Okay, it is not, there's no definition for a volunteer and there's no definition for full-time. That comes down to your risks, right? And your municipal needs and circumstances. There is no set rule to follow. We do have guidelines out there that will help judge, but there's no set rules that thou shalt at this point or thou shalt at this point. It's basically at your needs and circumstances, okay? And you rely heavily on experts on subject matter, such as your fire chief, okay? So there's no defined, but there are guidelines and there are standards and there are expertise, such as your fire chief, who will help you out. That's good. Okay, so speaking of fire chief, let's put him in the hot seat. There we go. Under the FPPA, the fire chief is defined and the role of the fire chief in terms of the legislation is defined, okay? What the municipality assigns to a fire chief as duties and responsibilities, that's apart from the legislation. We're just talking about legislative and regulatory obligations, all right? So the fire chief ultimately is responsible for the following. They're responsible to council for the delivery of fire protection services as per section 6.3, the FPPA. So internally, you may have a reporting structure that the fire chief shall report to this person reports to council or whatever, okay? Every municipality, well, pretty much every municipality does it slightly different or, you know, along the same lines. What this means is that the council is ultimately responsible for the fire protection in the municipality, right? You approve the establishing regulating bylaw, which we're going to talk about later on. It is the responsibility of the fire chief to ensure that that is carried out. It's the wishes of council. All right, so that's basically what it comes down to. The fire chief is responsible for leading and managing the established fire department. Implementing fire department services sanctioned by council, like I just said. Fire chiefs, by virtue of their positions, are assistant fire marshal, inspectors, investigators, and chief fire officials. We're going to talk a little about those positions going forward, but what it comes down to is the fire chief is a very busy person. Under the FPPA and the fire code, they have a lot of responsibilities. And they may exercise an option to delegate certain powers. Now, I don't know how the chief has set it up here, but anytime I talk to any of my chiefs, I always make sure that they understand that they don't have to put everything on their shoulders. There are certain powers that they're able to delegate as per what the FPPA says to other members. Now, I believe we have a fire prevention officer here, correct? So the fire prevention officer can be delegated certain powers under the fire code and under the FPPA. Sometimes it's content experts. Maybe the chief is not the expert in fire inspections and the fire code. Perhaps this gentleman over here is the properly trained one, right? Also, what it allows that if the chief is off sick for a few days and there are some things under the fire code that need to be done or a fire scene, that delegate is able to continue. So there's importance in terms of making sure that the fire department is covered I'm sure you're right on the ball. I knew it. I knew it. I didn't have to ask the chief. I knew he was. Yeah. Okay, good. Again, if there's any questions, please I just want to make sure here I'm not skipping. Oh, okay, that's that. Roll the fire chief. Sorry, but that wasn't on the right slide. Now, the FBPA also defines the powers and the duties of the fire marshal. So the Ontario Fire Marshal, John Pegg, has legal responsibilities to fulfill for the province of Ontario as well. And we're going to look at that right now. So under the FBPA, 9.91 of the FBPA, the fire marshal has the power to monitor, review, and advise municipalities respecting the provisions of fire protection services. So what John and I do on a day-to-day basis, we provide assistance to the municipal fire department, to council on the provision of fire protection services. But the fire marshal also has the ability to monitor and review a municipality. The fire marshal can issue a directive to the assistant to the fire marshal. Assistant to fire marshal, we're going to define a little later on, so don't worry about that. But a directive is basically a thou shalt. So for the fire chief, for a fire prevention officer, if they're both assistant to fire marshals, they shall make sure this gets done. The fire marshal can advise and assist ministries and agencies. So not only do we provide advice and assistance, statistics, and so on to municipalities, but we do it to other ministries and agencies as well. We issue guidelines to municipalities. We currently have a whole bunch of guidelines online. Some of them, if the chief has gone on the website, you may see under review. Some of these are a little bit older and we want to modernize them and bring them up to current regulations, so on. Also, I always recommend that even if it has an under review, we advise the fire chief to look at it anyway to get the concept. Then we could answer any further questions at that point. But we have some good guidelines for the fire departments. The fire marshal cooperates with any body or persons in developing, promoting, and principles of fire protection services. That's very important. And also one of the best jobs in terms of my job anyway, to issue long service awards for persons involved in provisions of fire protection services. So when the fire chief has been in service, the fire service for 30 years or so, or 25 years, we want to make sure that we acknowledge those years of service. The fire chief to other firefighters for what they do and then what they provide to the municipality. So some of the duty, sorry.
I think Tony has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
As an incident where our fire department was on call, render service. Am I right in assuming that our fire chief or designate fills a report about that incident? The Ontario Fire Marshal's office gets that report, otherwise how can you monitor? So am I correct that you get a report about what happens in a fire department? And you get to know what a fire department has done. What's the difference then when on the news we hear sometimes where the Ontario Fire Marshal's office has been called in as a fire is deemed suspicious? Who renders that opinion?
Okay. Fun questions. I'm going to try to deal with that part of it first. On a fire scene, if the fire chief is in attendance, if not the senior officer who's been delegated the responsibility, will do a primary investigation, right? Look around and see if there's anything suspicious. Was there an explosion? Those type of things. And when we talk about directives, there's actually a directive out there detailing exactly what needs to be looked for in terms of reporting that part of it to us, that part of it. Regardless of the incident, the fire department is required to complete what we call standard incident reports for each incident. Okay. The chief may have delegates to do it, maybe whoever, it doesn't really matter who does it. That is for everything, and fires, vehicle accidents, that type of thing, medical as well. Okay, so that's how we get statistics on fire rates and everything else in the province. Just to step back, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the calling for a fire because we think it's suspicious or there's an explosion or perhaps a death, that's for the fire investigator to come. So the story that you gave about on the news, that's the investigator coming to investigate it on cause and origin of the fire. Okay, so that investigator, along possibly with other engineers and technicians, depending on what the evidence is and all that, will formulate a report on that incident, on what happened, where it happened, etc. Okay. The part under the FPPA about monitor, the monitoring is more of, I'm trying to think of a good example. We don't use that very often, but we would have a province-wide initiative where we would be asking fire chiefs to provide us with some information so that we could get a clear picture of what's going on. So what we speak in here is not necessarily to the two instances that you talk about, because those are very specifically detailed on standard incident reporting and fire investigations. But the monitor end is more of, I can't think of any examples. Can you?
Yeah. So what we do at the start of the day, we'll do environmental scanning. And if we find that municipality has no more fire chief, that's part of monitoring. We'll contact the clerk or CAO and we'll ask the person, who's in charge of your fire department today? So that's an example of monitoring. That answer? So monitoring part about it for the SIRs, if I may again, the standard incident reports, the fire chief submits those. But there is the technical, the regulation says that the directive says if you have an explosion, boom, that's going to trigger our office to come and investigate that right away. There's a fatality or a serious injury. The directive speaks to that. So those are some of the triggers that would, hopefully that answers your question about why those get sent to our office. And to follow the directive, that's the fire chief. You want to say something?
Yeah, and prime example is approximately a year ago, we had someone pass away in a house fire within Meaford. The call was made to the fire marshal, and within 12 hours, they were down doing the investigation. So they will come in for certain pieces.
Thank you, Chief. Did that answer your question? Yeah, there was three really different parts of that question. So good. I'm glad you came up with good questions. But also the standard incident reports, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and how that gets done. Okay, let me just make sure I'm on the right side. Oh, come on. There we go. Sorry, guys. There we go. Put this down, don't touch. Duties of the fire marshal. So the fire marshal is responsible for investigating the cause, origin, and circumstance of any fire or any explosion condition, in the opinion of the fire marshal, that may have caused a fire, explosion, loss of life, damage of property. So we're just repeating what we just said. The fire marshal has to advise municipalities in the direction and enforcement of this act and regulations. So we have to make sure that we educate you as council members, the fire chief, the fire prevention officer, on what those regulations and the legislation is. Provide information and advice on fire safety matters and fire protection matters by means of public meetings, newspaper articles, publications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So communication is very big. And I talked about the municipality communicating fire protection services to its residents. The fire marshal needs to maintain and operate a central fire college. We used to have a physical location that is closed, but we still have the fire college in place. It's just not a physical building. Keep a record of every fire reported to the fire marshal with facts, statistics, and circumstances. That's the standard incident reports. Develop and maintain statistical records and conduct studies with respect to fire protection services. So all this data that comes in, reports are generated in order to start designing programs and going forward. Okay, an assistant to the fire marshal. I said this word before. This is an interesting position or an interesting role in the FPPA. There's a lot of powers in here. As we go through this, you may go, this is bigger than I thought. So the FPPA defines who is an assistant to the fire marshal. By virtue of the position of fire chief, that person is automatically an assistant to the fire marshal. Any member of a fire prevention bureau. So being that you have a fire prevention officer, that primary function is that, I'm correct? A third, okay. So regular duties have been assigned to this gentleman for fire protection, fire prevention. That is a fire prevention bureau. Okay, so it doesn't have to be an actual office with 3 or 4 people in it. The clerk, where there is no fire department. Remember, we had the fire safety officer or the fire safety team. For a municipality without a fire department, the clerk is automatically an assistant to the fire marshal. So it's up to us, John and myself, to ensure that clerk has the proper knowledge and education to go forward. And then the last way a person could be an assistant fire marshal is if the person has been delegated by the fire marshal, such as myself. Okay, I have been delegated by the fire marshal. So a lot of people can be, but some people cannot. So deputy chiefs, captains, firefighters, they can't automatically become an assistant to the fire marshal. We now have the process in place that they have to spend an hour or 2 online. Have you taken that? Excellent. There's an online course that explains all the powers and the duties of an assistant to the fire marshal. Upon completing that, the fire chief will complete a document, send it to our office, and then their deputy chief or captain, whoever, can be an assistant to the fire marshal. I always recommend that anybody that's going to perform any of those duties, even if they're a fire chief or a fire prevention officer, they should just go through that course, get a refresher. There's a lot of very important information in there. So what does the fire assistant fire marshal can do? So the FPPA outlines some of the powers the assistant to the fire marshal outlines all of the powers, but one of them is a powerful one. It's a warrantless entry. That's pretty powerful. So basically, as an assistant to the fire marshal in the municipality, and I'm sorry if I don't say this properly, but is it the municipality of Meaford or? Okay. In the municipality of Meaford, they have the authority to enter any building without a warrant. Now, they can't force their way in. They have to use common sense and everything else. But basically, that's a very powerful power under legislation. But why would you want to enter a building? Right? So you have for firefighting, rescue, or emergency services. You're not going to ask permission to go in to rescue the people, right? Conducting fire safety inspections and mitigation of fire safety issues. I don't know if your municipality has run into it yet, but it's happening throughout the province. Hoarding is becoming bigger and bigger, right? This is where that power comes into play. Obviously, you can't force your way in, and we're going to talk a little about other ways, but if the fire chief or fire prevention officer is denied entry, then they could apply for an entry warrant from the courts. Okay, once they enter the building, then they fall back under all their powers under this book. This is where it's important to have proper delegation in place. So the part of the FPPA which talks about the ability to enter lands, to do investigations, and so on and so forth, it basically says the fire marshal or the fire chief can do so. It doesn't say that an assistant to the fire marshal can do it. So this is where the chief, by delegating this power to the peoples in the department to conduct this, they will have the legal right to do fire investigations and other powers under that part.
Would the fire chief not have to have the same train of thought as a police officer for reasonable grounds?
So
Suspicious for reasonable grounds.
yes, so what you just said is what a police officer would think, correct? They're looking for evidence to prosecute criminally, to lay charges, criminal charges, and to bring it to court in order to have a prosecution. The fire chief entering a building is not in there to find evidence for prosecution. The fire chief or the fire prevention officer is entering the building to mitigate risk, to make it safe for the occupants. Can it lead to court? Yes, but that's not the intent. It's all about fire safety. That's what the FPPA is about. So that's why we are able to go in warrantless. We cannot force our way in, but we are able to enter warrantless, whereas a police officer or a detective, they're in there to specifically find evidence for criminal activity. Please.
So Tony, we have had scenarios where the OPP tried to use us as a because they noticed they have to want to enter the premises, but they have a feeling there might be gas regulator off control, so they try to use the fire to gain access, and then they follow suit. So we have to be very careful. Because we don't want that. We don't want any kind of fire. And if it's a property, we want the residents to realize we're there for safety. We're not there to us. We're not. Whatever they're doing in their home is their business. Our business is responsibility. So it's kind of that. So no, thank you.
I lose the test that, so give you an example, so before I get back up here on the president's accountability creator. We use orders, etc. Using the monthly checks or yearly checks of fire system was kind of the easy way around that. In a scenario where you had that in a fire here where you suspected there was an order, which is obviously health, fire, medical concern. Who would report that to you? Like, because again, if you don't know, somebody has to tell you that the neighbor is concerned because that is concerned. How does that fall to you if somebody reports that?
Yeah, so very briefly, because there's a lot of wheels and cogs involved in this, but more times than not, it could be the police, it could be EMS, it could be social workers, it could be a neighbor that has contacted the fire department with concerns. Okay, and there's a regulation out there that the chief fire official must investigate in some way. Okay, if there's a complaint. And that's the general way of getting into it. Once that suspicion is in play, either the fire prevention officer, the fire chief, what have you, they go and investigate. And then once it is determined whether or not it's a hoarding, then there's a whole snowball of things that need to be done. Right? And it involves a lot of agencies in the municipality as well.
That's the toughest one. Hoarding by definition. You really have to have a lot of thought.
Yeah, we deal with power of sale of somebody. That instance, I think it was years of going through.
The unfortunate thing is hoarding situations are usually a mental health issue. This is not something that can be fixed quickly, right? So the fire department, again, its primary focus is life safety, right? So we want the occupants of that place to be as safe as possible, hopefully getting additional assistance and help from other agencies in order to progress further. But it's very good because this is where the clerk would be involved, which would alert obviously counseled so that you can be aware of what's going on, because other agencies are going to be part in. Building department could be involved, mental health, police, child services. There are so many services that could be involved. Might have to house these people while things get mediated, right? So it's good that you ask questions about that, because it does implicate counsel. Good. Did that answer? Sorry, yes, sir.
So, before you refer to all this, I think it was, the assistant, have to identify yourself. I'm assuming.
Yes, correct.
But I'm wondering, you have to give a reason for your answer, like can a suspected offense. Please give me some way to not be careful. I mean, here again, what we're getting into the human rights. Where?
Yeah.
Where does that line end or begin?
Well,
It's a matter of adjustment.
no, it's a very good question. So first of all, your fire service are very professional people, right? So they're not just going to bust down a door and walk in and do anything. They're going to introduce themselves, as you say, provide ID if they've been asked to do so. And they're going to basically tell them why they're there. We've received a complaint. This is your annual inspection, whatever the case may be. Now, if the occupant says, I am not letting you in, these gentlemen here cannot force their way in. Okay, that's when they would come back, discuss with the clerk to advise everybody, request an entry warrant from the Justice of the Peace and go further from there. But yes, you were right on the, nailed the head, right on the head. Got it right there. You introduce yourself, you provide ID if required, or if asked, you provide reasons why you're there. Very professional, no matter what, even if it's a hoarding situation or what have you, they're very cognizant of the delicacy, the privacy, sorry, Chief, yes, please.
So in my career, we actually were driving by a house that was on fire. So we called it in, we pulled in with our fire truck, we climbed out, owner came out, told us to get off his property, not to put the house out, get away, started getting violent. At that point, we called the Ottawa police to come in, and under the authority of the fire chief, we're able to take over the responsibility of the property until the fire was taken care of. So there is situations.
You wanted this place to burn down?
People, that's all I have to say. So there are situations in which the power, is there for that reason. Would we just walk into someone's house when we were walking down on Sykes Street because the door's open? No, we need to have a reason why we're there, or have a suspicion of something.
Before Scott carries on, can I just remind us all to use mics if we can, please? We are broadcasting this, so we need to be able to pick it up.
Did that answer the question? Perfect. Yeah, no, unfortunately, that's the kind of situation where it might meet the criteria for contacting the office of the fire marshal. Suspicious activity. Yeah, that's interesting. I never heard a story like that. Very unique, yes. Okay, so assistant to the fire marshal, again, warrantless entry for firefighting, rescue, emergency services. That's like helping the ambulance, heart attacks and things like that. Conducting inspections, mitigating serious fire safety issues, the hoarding type of issues. And that outlines the different sections in the FPPA that it covers. Just again to outline, the assistant to the fire marshal has powers under the FPPA. Section 15, this is kind of going along the lines of the hoarding issues. The Section 15 is an immediate threat to life. Under the situation where there's a high risk of fire, and should that fire occur, there's a very high risk of death or serious injury. That's basically the criteria in a nutshell of an immediate threat to life. With that, the fire department, the fire chief, assistant to the fire marshal, can order the immediate removal of all occupants and not allowing them to enter until the contraventions, if you want, or the issues are resolved. It's a temporary fix to fix really a bad situation. So if they were called in by health services type of thing, they went in, they saw floor to ceiling stuff. The stove was covered in combustible materials. There's extension cords everywhere. There's space heaters everywhere. The cords are hot. They're smoking. They have a very small aisle to move around in. They only have one exit in and out. That could be considered an immediate threat to life. And under the powers of the FPPA, the assistant to the fire marshal could have these people removed until such time as there's smoke detectors in place, the risk of fire is reduced by whatever means necessary, etc. But it does imply that if you're going to remove somebody and they don't have a place to go, the municipality may need to assist in housing them. Please.
We actually had to do this 4 years ago, I think it was now. It was a combination of a hoarding situation and some people with mental health difficulties in other ways. And we did have to, the chief at the time, in effect said that the people couldn't be there any longer and couldn't stay. And we organised with the county to provide them some initial housing. And it was a hotel to start with. And then I think they went to a relative's home. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't been back to the house since.
So yes, to answer that question, no, they haven't been back to the property. They have been, to my knowledge, have gone to a retirement home. Family could only take them for so long. It wasn't really a good fit, so they went to a retirement home, and I believe that's where they still are currently. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you'd have to talk to building, but they're looking at demolishing the property. It's not habitable, unfortunately, at this time.
Good. Yeah, you could imagine going through a situation such as this. There's going to be costs involved, right? Thankfully, the FPPA gives you, the municipality, the means to recover some of these costs, hopefully all the costs. There is an order to recover costs. So any expenses, keep records of them so that you could issue the order. If they don't pay the order, depending on how your municipality set up, you could put it on the tax roll. You know, we could help you if you have any more questions on that. We could assist with the chief on that as well. But the idea being is that, yes, there's going to be costs to this and a couple of the other orders that we're talking about here. But we do have provisions in the FPPA to allow you to order the recovery of these costs. Okay, so that's a good thing. Sorry. Section 21 of the FPPA is the inspection order part. So when one of these buildings is inspected by our fire prevention officer and there's contraventions to the fire code, the fire prevention officer could write an order for them to comply with the provisions of the fire code. Section 21 also includes the ability to close a building. There are times where the fire safety issues are so extreme that doing an immediate threat to life is not sufficient. So the fire department will, in conjunction with the Office of the Fire Marshal, get all the paperwork done to be able to send to the fire marshal for approval of an order to close. And we have two of them. We have an authority to close and an order to close. So if I'm the building owner and I'm very compliant with the fire chief and willing to work with them, they could have an order to close, which means ordering me to close my own building, and I will comply. But if I'm not a very good building owner and I'm not going to comply, he could actually ask for an authority to close, which means it's the fire marshal's approval for the fire department to close it. Okay. Again, it comes down to additional costs for the municipality. housing for the occupants, such as the ITL we just spoke of, securing the building. There may be costs involved in keeping the building services going, like electricity and say natural gas or whatever fuel system for heat and alarm systems and things like that. But again, that order to recover costs is available, and not an easy process, as you could well imagine, but yes.
So what body is covering that cost?
So at the moment, it would be the municipality. Okay, if the municipality, the fire department has closed the building, basically the municipality is assuming the responsibility of that building and those costs for now.
You said we could then chase that money.
Correct.
What body is covering municipal costs?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you're saying.
I think I can probably answer that one, Scott. Generally, those costs then get billed to the property owner. Hopefully we recover that. We can, if it gets to a certain stage, put them onto the tax roll, and so in effect make them part of taxes, which in worst case scenarios can get as far as tax sale and so on. But generally it should be the property owner who deals with those costs in the end. It doesn't always work. And sometimes we have to make decisions about the value of the money versus the cost of doing the pursuing of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Yes, please.
Thank you, Scott. Does a building have to be inhabited then to be closed? I'm thinking we have had some, derelict homes that have gone to rack and ruin. Does the fire department have any ability then, recognizing that they can sometimes be a fire hazard, even if not inhabited?
Okay, so the order to close, whether it's an authority or an order, and the immediate threat to life have to be occupied, because that's direct life safety issues. Abandoned buildings don't really get covered under the fire code. Okay, there's a little bit under demolishing buildings, but that's it. So this is where your property standards bylaw, this is where your building official would be more active in doing things like that. Now, the fire code does require that the building be secured from unauthorized entry. So that may involve the municipality putting on boards on the windows and the doors, maybe have a security company drive by a couple of times a night, whatever the case may be, right? But under the fire code, it's very, very limited on abandoned buildings. That's okay? Yeah. Sorry, just to go along with your question, now that I understand, I'm actually dealing with a situation right now where there's going to be a need to recover a lot of costs, and it's extremely unlikely the owner will pay for it, just by the history of the owner's actions up to this point. So there's going to be a point where it's going to be on the tax roll. The owner hasn't been paying taxes, so you know what happens next, right? After all the processes, the municipality in this case may be in possession of this building. Then they could sell it and hopefully recover some of those costs. It's not an easy answer, and it's unfortunate. Sometimes the municipality has to carry costs for an extended period of time. Very good, excellent. The last assistant fire marshal on section 21. There are times where there's blatant electrical safety issues in a building. Fire department staff are not necessarily electricians. They may or may not be, but the assistant fire marshal can actually order the electrical safety authority to conduct an inspection, electrical inspection, based on the criteria that they fill in on the order. It's very nice because basically what happens is once you've done that, the ESA will take care of everything. You don't have to be involved in it. They'll provide you with updates and reports and status of everything, and just makes your life a little bit easier on that part of your inspection. Yes, sir.
So the Electrical Safety Authority, I'm just going to ask if our fire department, when our machine shop got an upgrade, we had the ESA come in, 3-phase power and all that. Was the Meaford Fire Department made aware through that permit that that facility has that kind of power going into it? And there's no cross referencing of, and yet the authorities are so important, but you literally do not know.
So yes and no. I'm gonna give a lawyer's answer. So the good news is we're working closer and closer with our building department, and we're actually part of the permit process for large upgrades or new builds that are happening within Meaford now early on. So that's where we would be aware. As for your particular situation, no, we would not have been made aware of that.
Thanks, Chief. No, it's a very good point. When the chief just mentioned that there's a good relationship between the fire department and the building department, I would assume other departments as well. That's very important. That's communication, right? Communication is so critical these days, from council all the way down to all the departments, excuse me, and amongst each other. So that was very nice for me to hear that there's good communication going on. And yes, I know, I wish the left hand would talk to the right hand from time to time. All right. What else here? Okay. So another nice little part or power of the assistant to the fire marshal is various types of enforcement. So I already talked very, very briefly about an inspection order. It's a document that the building owner has the right to review, ask for a review. And there's a whole process for that. But the fire department is not stuck with orders only. If Scott, the bad building owner, continuously fluffs off all the safety issues, ignores these orders and everything else, there's other avenues. There's Part 3 summons. You can bring them directly to court at any stage of this inspection. There are 46 contraventions, I believe now, that an assistant fire marshal could write a Part 1 ticket for. Things like door wedges, no smoke alarms, those type of things. So there's many enforcement options that an assistant to the fire marshal has as a tool to ensure conformity to the fire code. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about the resources that are available to the fire chief and to municipal council as well. If you really get interested in this fire stuff, it's not a problem. Okay, so some of the resources that we have public fire safety guidelines. This is the one that I mentioned that we have a couple that are still under review, but they're still relevant in terms of what the content is trying to get through to you. Okay, so some of the information may be outdated, but the actual principles in it are very good. But a lot of the more recent all the more recent ones, they're all updated. They're all relevant to today's codes. They're all relevant to today's needs and circumstances as well. Fire marshal directives. We currently have, I think we have 10 fire marshal directives. We just updated one of them, which is the triggers for calling the Provincial Emergency Operations Center to talk to a manager about a fire investigation. So it really details on what circumstances, what the triggers are, and when these calls can be made in order to talk to somebody. Other directives are the directives for standard incident reports. They shall be done. And when to submit them too. Directives for, our vulnerable occupancies. We have some requirements, some regulation about annual fire drills and inspections. And we have a regulation about processing complaints and requests for approvals. They're also supported by a directive. Okay, so it's the assistant to the fire marshal that is responsible to ensure that they get carried out. Now, the fire chief may turn to his fire prevention officer and say, you're going to do it, but at least he's making sure that it's getting done. Yeah, okay, delegation. And like I just mentioned, we have regulations under our act. So we do have, let me see, do I have here? Yeah, we have Firefighter certification, that's a recent one that you've been involved in. That's a regulation. Community risk assessments, that's part of our presentation. Mandatory assessment of complaints and requests, mandatory inspection, fire drill for vulnerable occupancies, and of course, the big one, the fire code. That's a regulation. We also have fire marshal communiques. These generally go to the fire chief at the very least. Do you get to communicate announcements? Okay, they go out to the fire services basically, and they cover all different types of situations. We were talking, Councillor Greenfield, we were talking about hand sanitizers. Well, we sent out a couple of communiques about hand sanitizers during COVID and storage of this type of thing. Any relevant fire protection issue out there that needs to be communicated out to fire services, we will release a communique. A lot of times, a lot of these directives and regulations also follow with a communique. Well, guess what? It's your turn. Thank you, and we'll talk again in a moment.
Hey, I'm going to offer this. You want a 5-minute break or do you want to keep going?
Do you want to take a 5-minute recess? Well, I think we'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I think we'll resume and turn it over to you, John.
Thank you, Your Worship. We mentioned this before, so every municipality shall, under 2(1)B, it states shall provide other fire protection services that it determines necessary based on their local needs and circumstances. If you don't have an airport, why even be a concern? Airplane fuel and all that, you don't have that, so your local needs and circumstances, you pretty well know, and I got some good news for you. The fire chief already let me know that your CRA has been completed. That's amazing. Thank you for so much for that. So this means that every municipality is required to provide additional fire protection services. And we saw the definition of fire protection services, right? It entails a whole bunch of stuff. After it first assesses its needs and circumstances of their own community and determines what may be necessary. So this slide here, if you look at the slide, the community risk assessment, the CRA, I'm going to refer to it as the CRA, plays a key role in supporting informed decisions made by your councils and your fire chief in regards to fire protection services. So July 1st, 2024 is the date that it has to be complied to. It's a regulation. Proud to say that the fire chief has completed that CRA. We have a technical guideline that was developed to help the municipalities on how to accomplish the CRA. I believe the fire chief has used that guideline. We'll just talk about it very briefly what the guideline entails, but it assists the municipalities to make an informed decisions based on their local needs and circumstances. And there is a tutorial. The fire chief, I'm thinking, took the tutorial. It showed the fire chief on how to do section 1, section 2. So we'll just jump right into what the sections are. Give you an idea what the fire chief had to go through to complete their CRA, his CRA. Geographic profile. You got rail in town? No, so that's not a concern. So highways, waterways, canyons, bridges, they all come into play. Why? It's your response. How long will it take you? Maybe that bridge is out of commission. There's maybe an alternate route, whatever. There's a whole thing. That's why the geographic profile is so important to take into consideration. Your building stock. Do you have anything over 3 stories higher? Do you have vulnerable occupancies? Schools? That whole building stock. Your impact probably helped you a lot with that one, right? Your critical infrastructure. Your electrical distribution, that could be a problem. Water distribution, your hospital. You have a hospital here? There you go. So those are all critical infrastructure. Had to take that into consideration when putting this community risk assessment together. Your demographic profile, your age of your population. That's probably easily found on StatScan. So that had to be taken. What is your age group of different ages of your population, etc. Your hazard profile. You're going to see some similarity between emergency management. They have the hazard profile also. So the hazard profile would have been very similar to what the hazard profile. There you go. So some of that work was done also. Your public fire safety response profile. Well, you know what? You've been attending fires for many years. So what is the trends? What is the profile? Do you have more fires maybe with wood stoves and all that? Helps the fire chief to develop programs to boot, but had to be taken into consideration. Your community services profile. Why is that important? Well, what if you have to move a great bunch of people somewhere because you had a disaster? So where are the locations? Well, that comes into the community risk assessments also. Your past lost events history. Well, we tabulate that also. So the fire chief reached out to me. I think I gave the fire chief that before he even asked for it. But basically, a 3 years worth of data for your municipality was provided to your fire chief, so to help compile the statistical data for your municipality, along with the ones that he already has taken care of, because the ones we have is probably exactly the ones the fire chief has and more. And those profiles are used to, again, formulate your program and enhance what the community risk assessment is all about. So taking all of that together, mulling it over, now I believe you presented it at the council. Okay, stay tuned. It's a very comprehensive document that'll give you a really good overview of what the municipality is all about. Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is considered a risk or not, but the municipality of Meaford is in the midst of considerable growth with, for example, some 5-story buildings proposed. And I wondered if, those changes to our infrastructure profile would be considered a risk, or if they would be included in this assessment.
And that's a great question. If I turn to fire chief and ask the fire chief that question, you don't have to get up, chief, but you go right ahead. You're up.
Absolutely. So we do have a community risk assessment that did take growth into consideration, because that is something that we're going to have to deal with. And that means jumping to those 5 stories. But I also have a risk register on the side that we maintain for Meaford. And that is actually where I capture the fact that we are now allowing 5-story buildings and what mitigating what we do to mitigate those factors. So, for example, coming forward with a ladder that's able to take care of that. Change our training profile so that we're able to start training on 5-story buildings, so that once they do arrive, we're able to manage any emergency that happens in there.
Thank you, chief. That's a great answer. Yeah, so all of that put together, your risk keeps going up because you're going to mitigate. We'll talk about that in a little bit about mitigating risk, but yeah, knowing about it, it's a plus. So your fire prevention officer may be a lot more involved now because it's a high-rise building. There has other fire safety considerations for those buildings. So yeah, that's part of your community risk assessment. When he puts that all together, which he already has, a presentation to council, most likely, and you'll have a great understanding the work that was put into this and have an understanding of what your needs and circumstances are for your municipality. Any further questions? Yeah, this CRA is reviewed annually. So if things change, or as they change, you could enhance your community risk assessment. Very good.
And the big advantage of having a community risk assessment, there wasn't one when I arrived, is as the next chief arrives, they're able to open up the documents and have a really good understanding what the risks and how the municipality is set up, so that they can hit the ground running instead of trying to learn it on their own. It's an incredible tool.
So next question. So is there a report card from the Ontario Fire Marshal, or like, so how does Meaford do as a whole? I'm just curious, like as a mean average, there must be reports on a regular basis of kind of municipalities, like where do we fit in the mix?
In regards to your community risk assessment?
In terms of overall performance, in terms of, yeah, I mean, some municipalities must have more fires than others, or must have much more emergencies than others and responses, et cetera. I'm just curious. I mean, then maybe I'm way off base, or maybe there isn't something like that.
Well, your fire chief would be the best person to answer that question, because he could do comparisons for you. I would not have those comparisons for you, but your fire chief, if he chooses to do so, and that's your direction, he would undertake that and compare your municipality to a place like Temiskaming Shores. See, it's about 11,000 up there too. So they could do comparisons, see how you're doing that way.
Yeah. Overall, Meaford's a fairly safe municipality. We don't have a lot of industry. We don't have rail. We don't have, Highway 26. We do have traffic, but we don't have a 401 or a 427. Our real risks are natural. So the bay would be an example for that risk, or our hiking trails. The military base does also pose a bit of a risk as well.
Thanks, chief. So the CRA is a great tool to use. The fire chief used all the schedule in that technical guideline. So it's a great tool to use, and it'll determine a lot of data for you to analyze eventually when you meet with your fire chief. So in some minutes, you go ahead.
Sorry, a second question, if I may.
Sure.
The risk assessment, does that really only deal with fire-related circumstances? Like I'm thinking we know that there's a significant increase in mental health, thinking on the medical side of things, and an increase in addictions and so on, particularly the last few years during COVID. As that continues and puts more strain on our fire department to answer medical calls, does that fall under the risk assessment, or is it strictly related to fire?
It's strictly related to fire.
To fire. Thank you.
And rescue, yes, fire and rescue. Another thing about looking at your public fire safety education programs, the fire prevention officer probably has a huge part to play in that. Again, looking at your municipality statistical data, if you do have a lot of people burning with wood stove and it becomes a problem where you're getting a lot of response and you could see a spike in those types of fire, a program could be developed, or go to our website. We have a lot of information on our website because that's part of our duty also, is to provide educational materials. Your fire service probably has I would say a website. You have a website. So there's a lot of information on the website for people doing those things. But if you had an issue that's peaking, could be open air burning, it could be wood stoves, could be whatever. The time to tackle that is when you get your data and you analyze, you're saying this keeps rising up. Again, direction to the fire prevention, saying, okay, we'll have to put together educational program. How do we get it out there? They think outside the box. There's a lot of ways of getting that information for public education. Great questions out there. Thank you. Like BLRs, you have heard what BLRs are? They're called boarding, lodging, and rooming, which is happening a lot. I don't know if it's happening up here very much. Those are student population. For example, an increase in the student population and a lack of housing options causes an increase in multi-unit residential dwelling known as boarding, lodging, and rooming. What it is multi-persons unknown to one another living in a house together, each with their own room, but share cooking and bathroom facilities. And some of these BLRs, you may not even be aware of them, all of them, some of them, they should be built under a building permit. Some may not be built under a building permit, and they could be an issue. So a regular routine inspection program that targets multi-unit occupancy such as BLRs and enforcement of the fire code would be appropriate for this municipality. I mentioned to the fire chief about a fire prevention policy. Back in Temiskaming Shores, about the size of your municipality, my fire chief created a fire prevention policy for me to follow, and we did it together. Council approved it by bylaw. It basically broke down like a job, almost a job description. So we had hospitals. So back then, fire chief says, we're going to inspect the hospitals every 3 years. We're going to inspect schools every 3 years. We're going to inspect one commercial or industrial plant every year. And they broke it down. And then the fire code talks about 9.2, 9.3, 9.4 retrofit. Well, the fire chief says we're going to do X amount of those every year. And then we're going to do complaints and requests. It broke everything down into a fire prevention policy. And again, I don't know if you're thinking of getting a fire prevention policy. It basically lays it all out. Council's wishes and desires is how it unfolds. Entirely the dialogue you have with your fire chief and how that, because ours got approved by council. So it's a great tool in the toolbox. Go ahead.
So we do have something similar. We call it the fire service standard policy. And that's actually something that Courtney and I are currently reviewing in the light of the results of the community risk assessment. And that'll come back to council at some point this year as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. Have you had a chance to look at the risk, recognizing the risk exercise that was sent to you all? So you have Septemberville, right? Septemberville is very prosperous. They have a 250 bed vulnerable occupancy being built. So this is the risk exercise component of the presentation today. So I'll walk through and give you a high level of what scenario one is the Septemberville. So we have Septemberville, huge population growth. We have a new residential development, more infrastructure, 3-story long-term care. Is that maybe a risk, a higher risk? Sure is. We have 250 residents when it's complete. So you have a lot of people living in that vulnerable occupancy. What is the risks? What are those risks? So in review of Septemberville, I'm just going to walk you through some of the ideas that a fire chief may think about. And then when the dialogue happens with council, you can have those dialogues. When you go to a fire call, let's say at the vulnerable occupancy, is that high risk? Yes, right, chief? It's a high risk. So how do you mitigate that risk is basically saying, well, we'll do a pre-plan. So a pre-plan is basically, we'll take the fire crew there. We'll do an orientation. Where's the main natural gas shut off? The electrical panels. Where would we attack? Where would we park this car? So high risk occupancies, I believe you do that, right, chief? You do pre-planning for these high risk municipal properties. And that way there, when the fire occurs on those properties, they know where to station. If somebody's coming to help them from out of town, he knows where to station those people. And it works very well. And then we have the fire safety plans. I don't know if council is aware of fire safety plans. I believe you have a fire safety plan for your building here, right? So those are very important, especially for the vulnerable occupancy, because the owner, he or she may have some involvement, may have been involved in creating the fire safety plan. Well, you just don't create these plans on a whim. There was a course that these owner operators that were involved with building these fire safety plans, they had to understand what to look for, what to address based on the course they took. Fire chief took a similar course. It's not the exact same one, but it's a similar topic. It's a fire safety planning for the fire service. So in terms, when they go inspect that home, there should be a fire safety plan, should have somebody that was involved with putting that fire safety plan together, and the fire safety plan should be all up to date. Training of firefighters, a huge component. They may have some inherent hazards. How do you train? How do you protect those hazards in those establishments? Pre-plans, I talked about that. Training, increase level of service. You may look at high angle rescue if you get a building that's very high. I don't know. It's all dialogue that you have with your fire chief. Use your CRA to determine if these fire services are needed and which level those fire services you need. So Septemberville is prosperous. There's a lot. You may want to get another fire department, another fire station, new equipment. You take on additional services. Septemberville is very prosperous, but just remember, there's a lot of risk involved when you look at that. You take it the flip side, which you've all read about, Octoberville. Well, Octoberville is totally reverse. You may even have it says that some people are setting fires. There's unsafe heating practices. People are going to wood stoves now. It's just different mechanisms, mechanics. It's just totally pretty well opposite of Septemberville. So how do you mitigate that, and how do you work with all that stuff? Well, some of the things we thought about is that you could have neighborhood watch, as simple as that. You could have bylaw, which is part of your crew here at City Hall, is work with bylaw to and property standards on how to mitigate these abandoned homes and industries and et cetera, et cetera. You could have public education component, home safe cooking, safe heating. TAP C is a program for juvenile fire setters. You may want to bring that into your arsenal of tools for fire prevention and educating the ones that are doing those things. Yeah, you got enforcement options. You could ticket people. You could take them to court and put them in front of a judge. Loss of firefighters. You may have Octoberville. They're all moving to Septemberville. How's that? Well, you're losing firefighters. How are you going to recruit? You got to start thinking about how you're going to recruit other people. So think outside the box. Maybe there's a lawyer. Maybe there's a real estate agent that would like to maybe fight fires. Homemakers, who you just got to put it out there for people to come and help. And you'd be surprised that people will step up to the plate when there's a need, right? Just know that when you become a firefighter, there's a lot of training. You just don't get the hat and the boots and the coat. You got to have a lot of training. The lumber mill. Well, just because the lumber mill is shut down, which was the main industry, doesn't mean you just forget about it. That plant might turn into something else. I had one establishment when I was working. It was shut down. It happened to be a lumber mill. It was shut down. But when I did an inspection, because you want to make sure the safety features of that building, because you just don't want to lose it, because you lose it. I don't even think it's going to come back, but that's just me. So I inspected this building. I found out they were using the building for storage of everything under the sun, boats, cars. I didn't even know about it. So does that create a hazard? Sure does. You got fuel in the boats, you got fuel in the cars, you got different combustibles. Fire catches there. It's a nightmare for firefighters because there's lots of fuel. So those are some of the things to take a look at. So increasing lines 1 and lines 2 is a really good way to mitigate your risk. And at the start here, it basically says, I don't know, right here. Once the risk level has been assigned, the fire department can determine how to best treat each risk and the resources required. Options for treating risks include the following: avoiding the risk, mitigating or reducing, lessen the risk, accept the risk, and transfer the risk. So some of those are the options. Okay, we did the exercise. You're establishing and regulating bylaw. Wow, that's a powerful document. The formal establishment of any fire department is often done through enacting of the establishing and regulating bylaw. It's known as the E&R bylaw and may include directions from these areas. Articulate the types and levels of fire service, of fire protection services, sanctioned by council. Authority to proceed beyond your municipal boundary. We're going to talk about mutual aid in a few minutes. Your E&R bylaw does allow authority to your fire chief to go beyond the boundaries of your municipalities to participate in mutual aid. That's clearly articulated in your E&R bylaw. Your goals and objectives of the fire department, your general responsibilities for all members, methods of appointing personnel to your fire service. Fire chief is appointed by bylaw into his position. I don't know if the fire prevention officer has been appointed. Back in the days when I was working, all positions, the officer position were passed by bylaw. I don't know how you do it here, but it's something out there. Your organizational structure. That could be a schedule or an appendice to your bylaw. Even your levels of services could be an appendice or schedule to your bylaw. Your bylaw, I know it goes first, second, and third reading. You want to make sure that you could seek legal advice on it. Also, I recommend that to make sure you have an ironclad E&R bylaw. Your service levels, if something changes, well, you could change the schedule or the appendice, and you don't have to redo your E&R bylaw. You could do that for your organizational chart. If it changes, you could make the changes and make council aware, which is council's directions, right? So does your E&R bylaw reflect legislative requirements? Does it looks at Ministry of Labor, for example, NFPA standards? Firefighters are trained to the NFPA standards. What are they doing? They're doing interior attack with rescue component. What does their training look like? What does it reflect to the NFPA standards? Comprehensive document. There's other municipal bylaws out there. You have fire route. You have fire route bylaw? Yes, okay. Bylaw designated fire chief and deputy fire chief. I believe you don't have a deputy fire. Okay, so These are formal appointments. So fire protection services bylaw should not just include suppression activities, but also could include prevention and inspection activities. It's important to consider what other bylaws, we'll talk about them, which is fire routes, open air burning. Is your fire FPO regulate open air burning? You probably have other members doing the same thing. Fees for services, fireworks. You let fireworks go in this municipality? So who's regulating the fireworks? Cost recovery. You know, those are all bylaws that you could create as council. Exercising authority under the PPA, these could fall under fees for services or cost recovery. For example, fire investigation purposes. Necessary to determine the cause and circumstances of any fire explosion that has been occurred or is likely to cause a fire explosion. If you have to make a building safer for people to go in and try to determine the cause and origin, there may be a big shovel coming in. Somebody's got to drive that shovel. Somebody's got to pay for that operator and the use of that. So that cost recovery in your E&R bylaw would be great wording to have in there. Inspections of specified occupancies, that leads me to your fire prevention policy. It's a great way to get into certain, like you have a multi-unit residential, and you may want to do those multi-unit residentials, the north side of the town in even years, and the opposite side of town, odd years. However you decide to do it, again, it's a conversation to have with your fire chief. Fire protection agreements. Municipalities may enter into fire service agreements under 2.5 of the FPPA with other municipalities. Some examples, you could create a fire service agreement for fire inspections. And I had a conversation with someone in the audience today that some inspections might be really, really complex. Like it might be an industrial plant. If the fire prevention or the fire chief can't do the whole inspections by themselves, which they probably can, they could also reach out to outside of another municipality to get a fire protection agreement to do inspections on complex buildings. Public education activities, you could have a service agreement for that. Special rescue, like ice water, you could have a heavy auto extrication or hazardous material agreements. Agreements usually have costs associated with them as determined by the municipalities you're dealing with, but some agreements don't have to have cost. You could have an agreement say, well, I'm going to provide you water rescue and you provide me high angle rescue and we'll just offset it, no charges. Different ways of doing things, right? So some reason the municipality may choose to create a fire protection agreement if they don't have a fire department. Like Scott talked about six of them, I believe, that have no fire departments responding. Well, they could create an agreement to say, would you come and help us if we have a fire in one of our establishments? Especially if they have one that's a high risk, like let's say they had a small school in a municipality, no fire department, they may do a fire protection agreement to have coverage for that school. Or just a quicker response. We'll talk about quicker response, why it's good to have a fire protection agreement. Public education, inspections and all that, great way to have a fire protection agreement. Here's an example of a fire protection agreement. A quicker response may be possible by a neighboring fire department due to natural or man-made barriers that may be permanent or temporary and may impede the response of the fire department. Do you have an automatic aid agreement? And why would you have that automatic aid agreement, Chief?
This case is because the fire department is closer.
There you go. So quicker response, public fire safety, that's what's happening. It's a vast area. You look at that diagram, fire department B has an agreement, municipality B has an agreement with municipality A. They're going to respond to that little part of the municipality because they could get there way faster than they can get there. Some other way they could do that is also, what if you have a river and you have a bridge and the bridge is way over there, but the fire is way over there. So now you got to drive by the fire on this side. to get to the bridge across when there's a municipality closer that could handle that side of the river. The bridge goes out of decommission or needs to be looked at, repaired. Again, you could create one for that time of period where it gets repaired. Lakes, rivers, all kinds of stuff. Let's talk about mutual aid. The Office of the Fire Marshal administers the Province of Ontario Mutual Aid Plan under the authority of the FPPA, which serves as one of the options to service delivery arrangements for municipalities. Mutual aid is frequently described as neighbors helping neighbors in counties, regions, and districts across the province to assist each other. There's no borders with mutual aid. If I've known one scenario that I was aware of in my area when I was in the Kingston area. Kingston had a huge fire. They had people coming in from Belleville, Kingston was there, Elizabethtown, Kittley, Gananoque. There was no borders, even though they were in a different county or a region. They came and helped under mutual aid. It's neighbors helping neighbors. So the mutual aid has a minimum requirement for participation that all partners must agree and meet. This includes municipal and non-municipal participants. So there's a difference. Municipal participants are you people, your municipality. Non-municipal participants could be the DND, Department of Natural Defense. It could be federal, Indigenous Fire Department. Non-municipal participant, and if they meet the minimum requirements and they have all the resources and the fire chiefs agree, and along with us, there is a come on in, you're part of mutual aid, we'll help you and you'll help us. So some key points here: fire departments and participants must be authorized to participate in mutual aid. And where did the fire chief find his authorization to participate? It was in your ENR bylaw. Some municipalities don't have an ENR bylaw that specifically says that the fire chief is allowed to go beyond the boundaries. And if we discover that, we would contact the municipality and ask them to, a couple of ways of doing it. You could redo your ENR bylaw, or you could actually use one of our templates, which is a very simple wording. We offer that for no cost, like it's part of the stuff we do. You could just fill in the wording and submit that and get it approved by council and give us a copy of that. And we could see that you're authorized to participate in mutual aid. So mutual aid is not there to supplement a municipality's lack of resources. So if let's say you didn't have a ladder truck and you needed a ladder truck and you don't, but you're calling mutual aid for a ladder truck from the neighboring municipalities and you try to make that mutual aid, that's not mutual aid, because mutual aid is basically reciprocal in sense where, you know what, I got a pumper tanker, you got a pumper tanker, I got resources, you got resources, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say the municipality is, I'm okay with having my aerial going across the province, whatever, I'm okay with that. Then you could put it as part of mutual aid. Who cares? Council has agreed that we're going to share our ladder truck, but it's not meant to supplement the lack of resources for a municipality. Again, if that happens, mutual aid, the fire chief's still in control of the situation that's happening in their municipality. Of course, mutual aid can be declined. You're having your own event in your own town and they're asking for mutual aid. You don't have to go, but you let the fire coordinator. There's fire coordinators all over the province of Ontario overseeing the mutual aid plan. They will know which fire department's helping who. You can't make it. It's important for them to know that you've got to call your own. So they'll leapfrog over your municipality and go to the neighboring municipality and ask for help that way. Again, there's training modules for the fire coordinator on know what to do and that's their job description and basically what they need to do for the province of Ontario. But the participants need to know what role they play in the mutual aid plan. Follow certain guidelines and follow certain things. They have to. You get a fire call today, fire chief requires mutual aid. the responding fire department has to submit an appendix W. If the fire chief is responding outside his municipality, he has to submit an appendix W to the fire coordinator. In turn, we keep track. We get a copy of that. We keep track of that. And then if you have 2 plus U, that's 3, then it becomes a significant event and the fire coordinator has to submit another form to our office. We like tracking stuff. Let's talk about another fire protection agreement here. Automatic aid. Sometimes there's confusion with automatic aid, and I'd like to clear some confusion if there is any out there. Is automatic aid means any agreement a municipality agrees to ensure, just in a nutshell, what that slide is saying right here. It's basically saying providing the initial response to assist more quickly and the supplement response to assist more quickly. The delivery is seamless to a day-to-day basis. It happens. You got an automatic agreement. There's no thinking about it. Everybody knows what they need to do with that agreement. It generally provides on a cost basis and will be identified in the automatic aid agreement. So some of the costs, how do you take care of that cost? You can have a call per rate. You could have an annual rate, a fixed rate for the annual, and some of them have combinations of 2.
And just to give like an example of where we have automatic aid agreements, we have an agreement with Blue Mountains to come into our area just by Crystal Beach, just because they can get there quicker than we can. We still respond at the same time, but it's just to make sure that the closest vehicle is on scene as quickly as possible. But Great Highlands, for example, we provide fire protection for them. And then every month we send them billing for any services that we provide into that area. So we do have a large number of automatic aid agreements.
They work well.
Yeah.
So these agreements should be much more than just a handshake. Should be something that's on paper, reviewed by council and signed off, and everybody understands what their part is to play in these mutual aid, automatic aid agreements. So a mutual aid plan established under Section 7 does not constitute an automatic aid agreement. 2 separate things. Automatic aid and mutual aid are 2 separate things. Here, let's take a look at an automatic aid agreement. Community B has a large industrial complex located in Community A. An automatic aid agreement is established. The alarm, the way it's written, see, it's important to know how it's written. The alarm simultaneously goes to both fire departments. Community A, boom, they're there in a minute. Well, guess what? Community B, because that's the way the fire protection agreement, which is the automatic aid, is written, they're both going. Again, depending how it's written, Community B shows up and Community A is free to go. We have it under control. Or if it's written up that Community A stays for 1 hour, Community A stands for 1 hour. If the agreement, if it's different, depending how it's written, at the end of the day, for 1 hour, if it's written that way, and all of a sudden it's a heck of a fire, we're not going to get this out. Fire chief looks at municipality A and says, can you stay? Municipality says, sure. It becomes a mutual aid. It morphs into a mutual aid call then. Okay, so now they stay and help under mutual aid. Yes.
So our automatic aid agreements we have, do they automatically ring into both departments?
Depending on where. Depends on where it is. So for the Blue Mountains, it does ring into both departments at the same time. So we're responding at the same time. Gray Highlands, depending on where it is, we will only go. And then if it turns into something, we'll tier them. And then, for example, ITFD, even though we have a fire board, we do have an automatic aid agreement with ITFD. And their section of Meaford, they respond directly on their own. And then if it's a working fire, we're automatically tiered and vice versa.
Thanks, Chief. Well, let's take a look at some of the provincial resources out there. There are additional government resources available to assist municipalities. There is a communique that's out there, and I'm sure the fire chief has a copy of it. Municipalities have access to provincial resources for large scale or complex natural or human caused incidents. The primary purpose is to locate and extricate victims and provide immediate medical treatment to survivors and conduct other life saving operations. It's large scale, also for CBRNE, which stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosive. Great hazards with those. So we have a team, provincial teams, to respond to those, and I'll show you where they're located. So requests for access for provincial resources can be made by the fire department when the incident is beyond their own capabilities. They've exhausted their fire protection agreements and the capabilities of the local, county, district, region mutual aid system. It's overwhelming. So here's a good example: the Elliott Lake Mall collapse. We had the provincial resources attend. It was way beyond the mutual aid plan and way beyond what the community could do up there. So here's where the here's where the teams are located. Urban search and rescue teams, they're all at a technical level. Toronto, Ottawa, Thunder Bay, and Windsor. For the hazmat teams, they're Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor, North Bay, Thunder Bay, Peterborough. The communique really outlines all of this. Basically, I'm showing you what the communique says. Next slide. Again. The local fire department must contact their mutual aid fire coordinator to determine a local capabilities under mutual aids or other agreements. Who contacts the fire coordinator? It's the fire chief. Once the fire department has contacted the fire coordinator, they have this dialogue, what they need, the extent of it all. In turn, the fire coordinator is now going to go call the PEOC, the Provincial Emergency Center, and let them know what's happening. That happens all quickly. That's going to be assessed by managers and all that, and they are going to determine what needs are required to come to help. So that happens fairly quickly. Again, the municipality does not have to declare an emergency to request access to these provincial teams, but there's no cost involved when these provincial teams come and help you. And when they come and help you, there's another part of organizations called EPRU, Emergency Preparedness Unit. They're another supporting part of our office that has drones, has all the equipments to help these teams do their job very well. So it's another part of supporting the fire service, the teams out there. So there are a whole bunch of other resources out there. We have our SharePoint, which there's a lot of information for fire chiefs in there, but there's also a lot of information SharePoint for the general public out there. But there's a SharePoint for fire chief where you can go look at SIRs and other things, like maybe take the course on mutual aid, section 5 for respondents. We have emails that go periodically to the fire chiefs. We have the communiques that keeps you on top of everything. Myself, I'm the fire protection advisor for your municipality. So the fire chief and I believe, pretty close relationship now. I got to understand your municipality very well, and I provide resources to the fire chief, and I think it's a great working relationship here. Okay. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. You're doing very well. These nuclear materials response teams, that's pretty scary stuff. If, for instance, and this is never going to happen, something should happen out at Bruce Nuclear, I'm assuming that would likely be Toronto or Windsor.
Maybe both.
Sure, or maybe both. Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. Do we have enough of these teams to supply backup to do the mutual aid thing if one or two of them happen to because a nuclear problem could be huge, and
Right.
so have we got sufficient people and teams and equipment and resources to cover those empty bases?
Good question. Why don't you-
So I used to be part of the USAR team in Ottawa, and so there's heavy, medium, and light, depending on what it is. For example, Toronto is a USAR with an H. They're a heavy urban search and rescue team. I was part of a medium, which is Ottawa, and the resources that they have available and are able to bring to an emergency is extraordinary. I don't think there's ever been an emergency in Ontario as of this point where they've had to bring in two teams. Even Elliott Lake, they only brought Toronto in because of the close.
Mhm.
It would have to be pretty exceptional to utilize all the teams. But the resources that are available are, trust me, unbelievable.
Thanks for that. I feel more secure. Unless we turn into a Ukraine, I won't worry about it. Thank you.
Good question. Let's look at a review. Meaford had a review done back in the days, right? So this is basically a review for most of you, I believe. When the OFEM under the FPPA 9.1, remember he talked about the authority to monitor, review, and advise municipalities for the protections of fire service and make recommendations to council. We've done that for improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the fire protection services. Reviews are conducted in consultation with the municipality and its fire service. And so some of the components which may be included, which is your public education section of it, your fire safety inspection and enforcement, fire investigations, and training. We do not usually encompass line 3. We do lines 1 and lines 3. When the OFEM initiates a review, it's basically because they had been information received that warrants further engagement from our office. The OFEM staff will formally advise the municipality in writing of the intent of the scope and the review and timeline of completion of that review. The recommendations are those typically made. Here's an example that may trigger a review. There is a fire municipality that, for whatever reason, something's going on and there's no fire department responding to emergency calls. That would be a big trigger. We would look at that and we investigate it further, and it may trigger us to go do a review of that municipality's fire protection services. So we're going to look at some of the common fire community risk assessments. Go ahead.
Sorry, John, can I just interrupt? Because I just want to say, just so everybody's clear, when the Meaford Fire Department had a review done in 2015, it was a voluntary review.
Right.
We actually asked the OFM to come in and look at our services. It wasn't one that was triggered because of a major problem.
Thanks for clearing that. Yes, it was open arms, come and do a review on our municipality. So that's what we've done. So thank you for clearing that up. So some of the common recommendations out there is the CRA. You complete the CRA. We could look at many municipalities in the province of Ontario of the reviews that we've done in the last year or two. The CRA, some of them hasn't even started their CRA. So it was a common one. The review of their establishing and regulating bylaw. Well, I've come across an ENR bylaw. It was dated 1998. And it was I forget what it was, I can't remember what it was called, but we've talked to the municipality since then, and they willingly just did a whole brand. They weren't even aware their ENR bylaw was that old. So they just completed a brand new ENR bylaw, and away you go. Develop policies and operating guidelines, which, you know, they come from councils. These policies, guidelines, you know, they direct the fire service to do certain things, and the fire chief actions those policies and guidelines. So some of them were maybe missing, some of them were not there. Yeah, so you got to ensure if you're providing a service that you have guidelines and policies and stuff like that in relation to those services. Ensure the fire department personnel are trained and competent in maintaining their certification. That's coming. That's just right around the corner. I can't emphasize enough how much training is to the extent where training is just like a nice word. Yeah, I'm going to train you. It's much more than that. Training is basically who's going to do the training. Is that person qualified to do the training? Once the training gets involved, what level of training are we going to do? Who's going to participate in the training? You got to track all the firefighters that are taking the training. You got to test your firefighters to make sure that they understand what they're learning. And then you got the certification component. Also, you got to pass that. You got your lessons plans, you got your documentation. I believe your documentation was pretty darn good in Meaford here. It was in regards to the training. Can you look at firefighter A? I want to see your training records. Well, you know what? The training records, if you have training records, they've done the training. No training records at all. How do you tell if they did the training or not? So that's the thing about, and it's another part of the Ministry of Labor to have training documents in the fire service. Incident plans, pre-incident plans, pre-planning. Remember I talked about pre-planning? Very important to have that in your municipality. Technical guidelines. Technical guidelines on fire safety inspection and enforcement. That's the FPO uses that. It's a total guideline, how to write tickets, how to write orders, how to proceed for taking them to court. All that, it's a complex document. It's under review because it's being enhanced all the time, but it's still a useful tool for the fire service to use. Develop a comprehensive smoke and alarm, carbon monoxide alarm program that includes home escape planning. Some municipalities were lacking that. So we basically support NFPA when it comes to Fire Prevention Week. Fire Prevention Week, fire won't wait last year. Our office jumps on that and supports that Fire Prevention Week. In turn, municipalities are provided with that same theme, and they support that initiative, which is an annual initiative, which is great. Create a public fire safety education program based on current community risks. How do you know your community risk? By completing a CRA. Then you can develop a whole program and make that part of your fire prevention policy. I know I used to do, I think, 4 presentations to seniors. I used to do schools, et cetera, et cetera. It was listed in my prevention policy. Ensure compliance with the vulnerable occupancy as outlined in the legislation. You have to inspect your vulnerable occupancies. You have to do an annual, participate and observe an annual fire drill that's sanctioned by the fire chief, and do the inspection and do the submission into the data process for the OFM, the Office of the Fire Marshal. We need all that information inputted into that location so we could see that fire departments are actually meeting their regulated requirements. So that's another part of monitoring. Well, we made it to the end of our presentation. Oh, well, yeah, we are. Learning objectives. Let's recap our learning objectives. And if we didn't cover those things, let me know. We reviewed and discussed legislative responsibilities and regulations affecting municipalities, the role of the assistant as a fire marshal, the fire marshal's powers, et cetera, et cetera. We also identified key sections of the FPPA with respect to municipal requirements such as a 2.1b. Every municipality is required to provide additional fire protection services, and municipalities are required to either appoint a community fire safety officer or a fire chief. We talked about that. We reviewed a variety of concepts relating to fire protection services, such as public education, inspection and enforcement, emergency response, fire protection services, communications, a huge one. Additionally, we reviewed and discussed the CRA, the ENR bylaws, other bylaws, fire protection agreements, right? Mutual aid agreements, automatic aid agreements. We also identified municipal and provincial resources. We talked about that. And we also provided common recommendations based on the past reviews. So we truly hope that you've enjoyed the seminar. It provides you with further insight and clarity, hopefully in respect to the essentials of municipal fire protection. On behalf of Scott and myself, we'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know councils are very busy, and we thank you for attending the seminar. I hope you found this information very valuable and more opportunities to support your roles. We're looking at those in the future. Like this is just one module of that's being developed to assist. We are also looking at making this a 24/7 online presentation for council down the road. So this is the time where if we didn't answer all your questions, you have questions, we ask that you ask them now. And
Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So today I've heard a lot of things about regulations and authority and powers and so on. So to set this up, we have an incident where the OPP are on the scene. We've got the emergency services with the ambulance there and people are being taken care of. And there's a fire and the fire department's there. Who's in charge? The police, because it's a civil situation? Is it the EMS because they're trying to save somebody's life in the back of an ambulance? Or is it the fire department when they show up and they can tell basically everybody what to do? Who's got the authority, but for what was presented here today?
So at the end of the day, each of those groups have a particular task, and what we do is we set up under what we call a unified command. So that's where a representative from each of those groups would come, and we would be in a single location where I would be giving advice on the fire, police would be taking care of the police matters, and EMS would be taking care of the medical side. So it's under the IMS, which is incident management system that we use in Ontario. And it's a standard across the board. And that is what allows us then to move on with that. And we may agree that if it's an active shooter situation in that unified command, we may turn and say, well, we're going to stand right here. OPP, you're going to lead this due to the fact that it's an active shooter situation.
So your answer is that it can be fluid.
Yeah, absolutely is fluid.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
great question, Councillor Bell.
Thank you. You mentioned several times about small communities that don't have a fire department. Would it be mandated that they do have a mutual agreement with somebody?
Well, they have residents that they have to answer to. So the tax bases, they have no money to do that. But the ones that I know that have inherent risks have created fire protection agreements. Some may not have any forms of fire protection agreements. I don't know, Scott, do you know any more than I do about that?
So if we remember 2(1)A, it said the municipality shall provide public fire safety education and some provisions of fire prevention. What that looks like depends on the risk, right? So somebody has to do that. And it also says that you have to provide fire protection services based on your needs and circumstances. So those municipalities that I named, I think it was 5 out of the 6 that I visited personally. One had a really big contract with the neighboring community. One used to have a contract for rescue on the 417, but they canceled that out. So that section of the municipality was not protected if you had a car accident. Another one did not have any services. And others intertwined, right? So it really does come down to how that FPPA has written it. They had the clerk, who was the assistant to the fire marshal, doing some public education. Some of them had a neighboring fire prevention officer come in and take care of the school. There was another building, I think, so a couple of buildings. So it really is very dependent on the certain needs and circumstances. But to say that you have to do it is not what the FPPA says.
Councillor Forder.
Thank you. This has been very educational. Thank you. Question with regards to how does fire prioritize non-human residents? So, you know, pets, or if there's a farm with livestock, what exactly is the protocol for providing a safe environment? I'm not saying that we put human lives in risk to rescue somebody's dog, but what are the considerations that you guys have to think about when it comes to something like that?
Great question, Councillor. I believe the fire department, in dialogue with your council, can make decisions on how to address those calls. So if you have something already set up, chief, you could talk to council about what you got.
So it also comes down to the situation, and you know, like any emergency, it's extremely fluid. We get to a fire and it's in the roof and the first floor is clear of smoke and we're able to get firefighters in. We'll definitely take a look for, you know, during our primary and secondary search to look for both humans as well as animals, do our best to rescue. But it comes down to the situation. If we get there and the place is completely full of smoke, we're unable to see, we know that nobody's going to survive that. We're going to do an exterior attack until we're able to deal with the situation. And then we'll get in there once it's relatively safe for our firefighters. All because we're firefighters doesn't mean you run into a burning building that's fully on fire like backdraft. Those are command decisions that have to be made in the moment. I got a call from dispatch about 6 weeks ago for a horse that was trapped on a fence. And the decision was made that we would go out and try to take care of that, and we were very successful in that rescue. It really is a difficult answer because every situation is so fluid.
Certainly. Second part to my question, if you don't mind. So what sort of specialized training does our fire department receive for dealing with animals, since they can be quite unpredictable, as we all know?
We have done large animal rescue in the past. Other than that, it's just a lot of people are pet owners, things along those lines. So the neat thing about the fire department is that we bring so many people to the table that have so many different skill sets. And my job as being in command is being able to utilize those skill sets. So for example, we have somebody who used to be a pig farmer, who's on our department. And, you know, if we have a fire, you know, an incident at a farm, guess who's standing beside me at command? Mr. Pig Farmer, because he probably has a better understanding of farm equipment as well as animals. Yeah, or we'll call in the case of we call the veterinarian in to help as well. So it's just being able to identify the resources and bring them in. Again, it's difficult because every situation is fluid. We train for the perfect scenario, and in my 20-year career, I have never come to the perfect scenario.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to close while speaking on behalf of myself as Deputy Mayor, but I think I can probably speak for all of council and say that we're extremely proud of our fire department. I think we all feel safe and well looked after. And I just want to share that recently I had occasion on behalf of a local service club to request a building inspection. And I just want you to know that service was prompt and thorough and extremely professional. And we received definitely the assistance that we needed to go forward and create a fire plan and to understand what might need to be accomplished in this building, which is an older one, to make sure that it was as safe as it could be. So I just want to hear, want you to hear the commendation that I feel, and I think we all feel, for our local department.
Thank you so much. We all have a part to play with fire safety, right? Here's a story, if I may. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. We have time, I believe. This is a true story. I went and visit my brother way up north, renovations. And he says, well, you're sleeping down here, beautiful bedroom. I see the smoke alarm on his shelving with his wrench, pliers, no battery, nothing. It's just sitting on the shelf there. And I'm going, okay, where am I sleeping? He says, down here. I says, I don't think so. He says, why? I says, what's this here? Oh, I'll put it up one day. I said, no, I look at that as my babysitter. It's like it's babysitting when I'm sleeping. So either it works or I'm going to go sleep at my other sister's or whatever. And he says, well, what's so important with these? I had an opportunity to educate my brother. He had one that was battery operated. He's an electrician. So he says, let's go buy after I told him about the technology, speaks in French and English, the light goes on and carbon monoxide and all that good stuff. He says, let's go buy some smoke alarms. I said, okay. So we went to Canadian Tire. We put smoke alarms as required, put them all through his house. I says, now you just don't look at them, test them. Okay. Tested them and worked. I says, I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight. I don't know about you. And I went and saw him not too long after that. He says, you know, John, I took that to my daughter in Thunder Bay and my daughter in Sudbury, and they do exactly what I asked them to do, exactly what you told me to do. He says, I sleep better there too now. So, you know, we bring our kids to different establishments and maybe they go sleep at grandma's. You know, have their smoke alarms being tested? I don't know. We're putting our kids in these homes, right? So I go around, I test. My wife does this often when I go and test a smoke alarm of somebody, and I just music to my ears. So, but fire safety is everybody's business, right? It's something that we should all really cherish, because when the smoke alarms will function, look at the statistics. People escape their homes. They being alerted to get out. There's a situation. No working smoke alarms. No smoke alarms at all. What are your chances, right? So that was my story. Thanks for letting me.
Thank you very much. I think as with you, oh, sorry, you had a question?
Your worship, I did have a question, and before I ask, I have to apologize because I do get behind on a lot of things, but the Ontario Fire College, for a long time, it was either Bracebridge or Gravenhurst.
Gravenhurst. Gravenhurst, yeah.
So I had the right end of the province. Anyway, a few years ago, a lot of our councillors got emails from the good folks up there saying, we've lost our Ontario Fire College, we've lost employment, we've lost purchasing power, so on and so forth. What happened to it? Where is it now? Is there still a facility? They're all online courses. As I say, I never really heard what actually transpired at the end.
That is a good question, and I am not touching that. No, I'm going to touch it. I'm only kidding. The fire college in Gravenhurst is a building. Today's fire college is virtual or learning contracts or different establishments, municipalities. It makes it easier for all the volunteers to go take courses instead of having to drive from Thunder Bay to go to Gravenhurst. There's regional training centers now. It's just changed. The building, I don't know what they're doing with the building. That part of it, I'm not 100% sure. And that's the part of the question I won't touch. But the touching, I will say that the educational component continues and it's very much enhanced. And we've built 2 mobile trailers. I don't know if they come up here or not. Mobile live burning trailers that is state of the art. Firefighters could go get their training through these, and we bring them to you at no charge, and locate them. And fire departments from around can go and get their training through these live burn trailers. So we're working, and I think things are working very well.
Okay, thanks for that. So the members of our fire department would it be one specific location they would go to, or would it be a number of different ones, or would it be a mix of virtual and actual hands-on?
Yes and no. I think that's a good lawyer answer. So we do a lot of in-house training ourselves. We do have the capability to send people. We have a regional training center in Markdale, which is, Grey County that utilizes it. It is more focused on, we don't get the same number of courses, but we do have the capability to go to other regional training centers if we're looking for particular courses. For example, Captain Pilon went to Richmond Hill for one of his courses, for example. I went to the Middlesex for another one of my courses. So they are running throughout the province. The challenge we're having is trying to figure out how we are going to train our next round of firefighters. traditionally you would hire them, bring them on board, give them some training, you'd ship them up to Gravenhurst and they would get their NFPAs. Now we are trying to figure out how we're doing that. And right now it costs us approximately $10,000 to $12,000 a firefighter to bring them up to spec so they're actually able to climb onto a fire truck.
Thanks,
And we also have learning contracts where we could use the resources of the fire department to help training. We have some special people who come in and assist with those learning contracts on site. So that's a request that can be made by the fire chief himself. Great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Any other questions? Sure. I was just about to say that the buck stops with us, and so I'm very glad that you gave us the time today to instruct us and bring us up to date. There's a lot to digest there, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Your Worship. One last thing, there is going to be a survey sent to each one of you. We encourage you to fill the survey. It helps us to improve our instructors, our presenters, the forum, whatever. Just answer those questions if you don't mind doing that survey. And once you submit the survey, you're going to get a certificate of attendance returned to each and every one of you. So again, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
And our next council meeting is in 91 minutes.